The realm. Do you know what the realm is? It's the 1,000 blades of Aegon's enemies. A story we agree to tell each other over and over till we forget that it's a lie.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back from my breakdown of the 8th season of Game of Thrones. In my last video, I talked about some of the big events I think we could see in the opening episode of the final season. Today, I want to continue by discussing some of the events that may or may not happen in the second episode of the 8th season of Game of Thrones. The opening scene of the opening episode is reported to open up at Winterfell with what could be the arrival of Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen. So with that in mind, I think they could open up the second episode in a different location. In my last video, I said I wasn't quite sure which episode Euron Greyjoy would return with the Golden Company. We do know that he already went to retrieve them in the Season 7 finale after he left the parlay scene at the Dragon Pit. Since the television show has been moving at an incredible pace, he very well could show up with the Golden Company in the first episode, but I'm going to go ahead and say he doesn't arrive until the second episode, and here's why. Since we're going to have that big opening scene at Winterfell with everyone arriving in the first episode, I think they could do something very similar in the second episode, but this time it could be Euron, along with the Golden Company, and the Relevants, arriving in King's Landing to meet with Cersei Lannister. Once they arrive, I imagine that Cersei would want to speak with the commander of the Golden Company right away. The first thing she might try to do is make sure the guy knows who is actually in charge. Then, of course, she needs to inform him of her plans. Does Cersei intend on keeping them in King's Landing to protect the capital, or does she want to go on the offensive by sending them to the north to attack Jon and Daenerys from behind, when they are simultaneously trying to fight the Night King's army? If Cersei sent them to the north right away, that could deliver a devastating blow to Jon and Dany's forces, but she would also run the risk of getting all of her men killed in the process. I'm gonna say Cersei will keep the majority of her men close by to protect the city, otherwise King's Landing would be extremely vulnerable if she only had the City Watch to rely on. You have to keep in mind, without Euron and the Golden Company, Cersei doesn't have many men left at her disposal. Most of her Lannister and Tarly forces were killed by Daenerys, Drogon, and her army of Dothraki Screamers. I can't imagine that Cersei would have too many Lannister soldiers left, so it might be in her best interest to keep the Golden Company in King's Landing while she waits to attack whatever men Jon and Daenerys have left after they get done fighting the army of the dead. By then, it could be a very close to an even matchup depending on how many soldiers Jon and Daenerys lose against the Night King. And of course, there is always a chance that Daenerys could lose more dragons when fighting the Night King as well. Cersei could potentially keep all of her soldiers healthy and fresh, while Jon and Daenerys get most of their men killed and or injured. Let's just say that by the time Jon and Daenerys are ready to head back down to King's Landing to deal with Cersei, they could be running very low on gas when that time comes, when in the meantime, Cersei was making her force even bigger. Also, there is always that possibility that Cersei could have more wildfire and ballistas made at the same time. This could make for one very interesting battle for King's Landing near the end of the season, which I know I can't wait to see. When it comes to Cersei Lannister soldiers, there is one other thing I want to mention before I go any further. In my opinion, I think there is a very good chance that Jaime Lannister could get some of those men to leave with him. As we all know, Jaime left Cersei at the end of last season. The final shot of Jaime was him sitting on the horse alone, with King's Landing right over his shoulder. But we all know it would be extremely dangerous for Jaime to travel all the way to Winterfell alone. This is another one of the reasons why I think we could see Jaime meet up with Bronn, and we could see him gather up as many troops as possible before he begins that long journey to the north to fight the army of the dead. Now, if you remember, right as Jaime and Cersei were about to have their last conversation together, we saw Jaime advising some of the top lieutenants or captains of the Lannister army. Cersei walked in as Jaime was telling his men they needed to go to Winterfell to help Jon and Daenerys. So after Jaime walked out on Cersei, he could have paid those men a visit and told them what was happening. Although Cersei might be their queen, Jaime is their commander, so they might be willing to follow Jaime no matter what. Jaime could have also went to them and not even told them that he had a falling out with Cersei. He could have just said something like, hey, it's time to go north. Don't ask questions, just get your shit and let's go. Since Jaime Lannister is their commander, they have to listen to him. However, if Cersei was smart, as soon as Jaime walked out on her, she should have immediately sent out word to all of their bannermen saying that Jaime is a traitor, and anyone that gets caught with him will also be branded as a traitor, a crime which is punishable by death. But, as I'm sure most of you know, I like Jaime more than I like Cersei, so I'm hoping things can work out in his favor, at least to some extent. If Jaime could show up in Winterfell with at least a small force, that could put him in a much better position. Even though Jon and Daenerys already agreed to fight together with him against the Night King, we all know Jaime will face some problems when he arrives. But if he's able to show up with an army, he can at least say, hey, you might not like me, but you know damn well you need my men. So, we might not have seen Jaime pay anyone a visit before he left the city, but that does not mean he did not speak to many people before he left. Jaime could have even sent out some ravens before he left, that way whoever is maintaining Riverrun or the twins will be expecting him to show up. Cersei could be in for a big surprise when she goes to call upon the Lannister troops. They might have already left to meet Jaime somewhere along the road to Winterfell. Just keep that in the back of your mind, because I will not be surprised if something like that happens. Now let's move on to Euron Greyjoy. As of right now, I would say that Euron is in a very good position when it comes to negotiating with Cersei. Not only has he been a man of his word ever since they formed their alliance, but he has went above and beyond for Cersei on multiple occasions at this point. Now that Jaime is gone and out of the way, Euron might actually have some leverage. Let's face it, Cersei needs Euron and his fleet. Cersei cannot run the risk of losing any more men at this point, so she might find herself in a position to where she needs to start meeting some of Euron's demands. Keep in mind that the representative from the Iron Bank, Tychos, he more or less said the same thing to Cersei during their last meeting. Euron Greyjoy might be loyal for now, but that doesn't mean that he's going to be loyal forever.
My armada owns the Narrow Sea.
Euron Greyjoy's armada owns the Narrow Sea.
Euron Greyjoy is loyal to me.
For now.
Those words had to stick with Cersei, and there is something else she needs to keep in mind. Since Euron is picking up the Golden Company, she has to know that that means Euron is going to spend an awful lot of time with these men and their commander. Now, Cersei might be the person that is putting the money inside of their pockets, but Euron can be very charming and very cunning at the same time. When traveling with these men at sea, he could form a bond with their commander. Therefore, Cersei might want to be careful before she starts demanding Euron to go and do this or go and do that, without giving him anything in return. The next time he goes to leave, he could try to get all of those men to load right back up onto his ships and take them with him. At least that's what I would be thinking if I were Cersei. Now I say all that to say this. Do not be surprised if we see Cersei and Euron have sex in this episode, or any other episode next season. Based on some of the off-season reports, we know Cersei gets naked next season. Now we don't know why she needs her nude body double, but there can only be a few reasons why they would. We won't be seeing any more Walk of Atonements for Cersei Lannister, and we won't be seeing any more sex scenes with Jaime Lannister, so my guess is Cersei either gets naked for some reason due to her alleged pregnancy, or she bangs Euron Greyjoy. Now, as I said in my last video, I expect Cersei and Qyburn to mass produce ballistas and wildfire, so we could get an update on their status in this episode. Cersei could have the Golden Company begin to station the ballistas all around the city, while Cersei and Euron go down into the dungeons to check on the progress of the wildfire. That would let us know that Jon and Daenerys might have the bigger army, but Cersei isn't just sitting around on her ass hoping that the Night King does all of her dirty work. This would let us know that Cersei is taking care of business. Now let's get the hell out of King's Landing and head across the sea to Volantis. If we don't see Melisandre in Volantis in the very first episode, then I think we need to see her in Volantis near the very beginning of the second episode for this reason. We know for a fact that the Night King and his army will reach Winterfell by the third episode. HBO even released this information to Entertainment Weekly just a few weeks ago, but we pretty much knew this would happen as soon as we found out Miguel Sapochnik would be directing the third and fifth episode. We also know that ever since Melisandre was introduced in the show, her main purpose, her main driving force has been to bring the light to the darkness. Melisandre has always known that this day would come, and stopping the White Walkers has been her main motivation for most of her actions thus far. Everything has been building to this moment ever since the White Walkers were introduced in the opening scene of the pilot episode. So if you think there's going to be a great war without Melisandre being there, you're out of your damn mind. We really only need to see one scene with Melisandre in Volantis, and at the end of that scene, I think she needs to indicate that she has to leave right away. That way, when she shows up in Winterfell near the end of the third episode, it's not too hard to believe that she could have made it there in time. Afterwards, we can assume that Melisandre was traveling for most of the second episode, and most of the third episode. Then she can show up to hopefully shift the battle back in Jon and Dany's favor. Remember, this is a Song of Ice and Fire, ladies and gentlemen. The fate of the entire realm hangs in the balance during the great battle for humanity. Everything that represents ice, and everything that represents fire will be in attendance during this battle. Melisandre will not only be there, but she will play one of the biggest parts when it comes to defeating the Night King. I'll go more into those details in the next video when Melisandre actually arrives in Winterfell, but for now, let's talk about the reasons why Melisandre may have went to Volantis in the first place. I did make a video about this very recently, so I will try to keep it brief. In my opinion, there are only a handful of reasons why I think Melisandre would have needed to go here before the Night King arrives. For those of you that don't know, Volantis contains the largest Red Temple of R'hllor. Red Temples are where a Red Priest can conduct their devotions every night, lighting a fire, and praying throughout the entire night for R'hllor to bring back the dawn. Well, do you remember how big the Septa Baelor was in King's Landing? The one that Cersei blew up with wildfire? This Red Temple in Volantis is 3 times the size of the Septa Baelor. So you can only imagine how many followers of the Lord of Light worships at this temple on any given night. You can also imagine that this temple has to be crawling with high-ranking members of R'hllor, people like Melisandre and Kinvara. When Melisandre arrives in Volantis, I assume that she will announce that she has united Ice and Fire, meaning Jon and Daenerys. Then she will remind everyone of the return of the Great Other, meaning the Night King. Well, that time has finally come, so if anyone from R'hllor truly wanted to help in this effort, now would be the time to come to Westeros to stop the darkness, by helping Jon and Daenerys bring the dawn. Who Melisandre brings back with her is a bit of a mystery, but I imagine it will be more than just one person, or artifact. She could potentially return with an army of her own, an army consisting of followers of R'hllor, slave soldiers, and high-ranking Red Priests and Priestesses. Daenerys will not be the only person that brings fire into the fold. But now I want to move on to Theon Greyjoy. Like I said in my last video, Theon will most likely be heading to the Iron Islands first. Theon Greyjoy should still be under the impression that that's where Euron and Yara were heading. The reason for that is because of what Euron Greyjoy said during the Dragon Pit scene. At that meeting, Euron reminded Theon that he still had his sister Yara. Then, after the White was released from the crate, Euron did announce that he was heading back to the Iron Islands because the Whites could not swim in the water. Now, we all know that he was lying because Cersei reveals that he's actually picking up the Golden Company for her. But the only other person that knows that information right now is Jaime Lannister. After Theon got into the fight on the beach of Dragonstone, he set out to go find his sister, and at that time, he still had to be under the impression that Euron was going to the Iron Islands like he said at the Dragon Pit. When Theon Greyjoy arrives at the Iron Islands, he's going to quickly realize that something isn't quite right, because Euron and Yara will not be there. Theon traveled all that way for nothing, but it will ultimately help him in the long run. Since Euron left the Dragon Pit to pick up the Golden Company immediately, by the time Theon gets to the Iron Islands, Euron should be on his way back to King's Landing to drop off the Golden Company. That should actually benefit Theon because it would give him an opportunity to get aboard the Silence without too many men being on the ship already. Euron should be back at King's Landing well before Theon gets back around the coast. Once Euron and the Golden Company do arrive in King's Landing, I imagine that Euron would leave his fleet right out in the Blackwater Bay. As soon as they're in the city, Euron and the commander of the Golden Company will most likely be with Cersei for the most part, but the majority of the other men will probably spread out throughout the city so they can get the hell off of those ships. They will probably want to go to some of the local taverns to get a drink or stop at the brothels. This would give Theon the perfect opportunity to strike. Euron's fleet would literally be like a bunch of sitting ducks in the bay. Now I'm sure that Euron would leave some of his men behind to watch over the ships, but nothing compared to what it would be like if Theon came upon Euron's fleet while he was sailing at full force. With Euron, his men, and the Golden Company spread throughout King's Landing, Theon may be able to get his sister back without meeting too much resistance. Now of course we will get a final confrontation between Theon and Euron at some point, but I don't think that happens just yet. However, I do think that Theon could get his sister back if he can sneak up on the Silence at night. You know what would actually be pretty dope? If Theon snuck onto the Silence, freed his sister, then set Euron's fleet on fire before he leaves. If Theon has time to sneak onto the Silence, then he should have enough time to set the damn thing on fire as he's getting off of it. Imagine if Euron would look out of one of the windows of the Red Keep, and he saw his entire fleet going up in flames. That would be hilarious. But let's get out of the south and head up to the north, all the way up to Castle Black. By this time, Beric Dondarrion and Tormund Giantsbane should be reaching Castle Black. Now you have to remember, they were most likely stranded on top of the wall after the Night King completely destroyed Eastwatch by the Sea. When the Night King knocked down that portion of the wall, Beric and Tormund should have had no other way of getting down, unless they walked along the top of the wall until they reached another castle that has some sort of steps or elevator system in place. Since most of the castles have been out of commission for a very long time, it's probably not safe to get down anywhere else but Castle Black. The length of the wall is roughly 300 miles long. Castle Black is located pretty much directly in the center of the wall, but that's almost 150 miles away from Eastwatch by the Sea, since Eastwatch was located right at the edge of the wall. Therefore, Beric and Tormund would have had one hell of a journey ahead of them just to reach Castle Black on foot. If this is the case, and they had to walk to Castle Black, then there is no other way they should be showing up in the first episode. But if they showed up in the middle of the second episode, I suppose that would work. They do need to get there somewhat fast because we need these men in Winterfell by the time the Night King arrives in the third episode. So I'm going to go ahead and say that they reach Castle Black in this episode, and once they get there, they will immediately alert everyone of what happened at Eastwatch by the Sea. Now that's assuming that Bran or Sansa didn't already send out word via ravens. You know what would be pretty interesting is if during the conversation between Tormund and Ed, we find out that they actually felt something happen at Castle Black. Lord Commander Ed could say something like, you know what, we did see the entire walls start to shake or vibrate, but at the time we didn't know what the hell was happening. Now this entire scene doesn't have to be very long either. After a quick conversation, we need to see these men get on some horses and start heading down the King's Road right to Winterfell. If you remember back in the very first season, Jon left Winterfell in the second episode, and he made it to the wall in that very same episode. They were traveling at a reasonable pace, but Tormund, Beric, and Ed, and whoever else should be hauling ass to get down there. Now I know I probably shouldn't be wasting time explaining any of the traveling because I'm sure the show will throw all of that out the window, but I want my breakdowns to make sense by being somewhat realistic. Now let's go down to Winterfell, where things should be getting more interesting by this point of the season. I ended my last video by having Jaime arrive just outside of Winterfell's gates, while simultaneously having Bran send out the Ravens to go spy on the Night King's movements. If Bran does happen to spy on the Night King to track his movements, which would be very smart to know where he's at all times, Bran needs to continuously relay that information to Jon, so he can progressively pick up the intensity around Winterfell. What I mean by that is, soldiers should be on standby or even getting into position, and more dragonglass getting crafted into usable blades. We should see a steady presence of this kind of activity during every single scene at Winterfell, at least until the Night King arrives. Let's start off the Winterfell scenes by having Jaime reach the gates, with Bronn and his men. Since Jaime will most likely be traveling with such a large party, they should be able to see him coming from a distance. Therefore, Sansa, Daenerys, Jon, and whoever else should be at the gates to meet him. They will want to know who the hell is approaching their gates with an army, although they should be able to spot some of the banners well before he reaches them. As we all know, everyone in the North hates the Lannisters, but even more so, they despise the Kingslayer. What could make Jaime's arrival even worse is the fact that he could be showing up in the North with soldiers from House Frey. You know, the people responsible for butchering their last king in the North, Robb Stark, along with his mother, Catelyn Stark. But let us not forget, Jaime also tried to murder Bran Stark. So, when Jaime reaches the gates, shit just might pop off. I'm really hoping that Lord Glover and Euron Royce are present during Jaime's arrival because they are Jon's most vocal supporters. I can imagine them saying something like, alright Jon, you know what? We let shit slide when you brought the wildlings into the North. And we even let shit slide when you brought Daenerys and her dragons into the North. But now you've gone too far. You want us to fight alongside the Kingslayer, who shows up at your gates flying the Frey banners? Don't be surprised when Jon ends up getting his wig split, or those cheeks busted when he tries to go to sleep that night. Shit's really gonna hit the fan when Jaime reveals that Cersei lied about sending their banners to help fight the army of the dead. I have a pretty good feeling that Jon might lose some support during this episode. Euron Royce might take the Knights of the Vale back to the Eyrie. We already heard some of the men say that they should go home and wait out the storm.
The Boltons are defeated. The war is over. Winter has come. If the Maesters are right, it'll be the coldest one in 1,000 years. We should ride home and wait out the coming storms.
The war is not over. And I promise you, friend, the true enemy won't wait out the storm. He brings the storm.
So when you combine that with all of the drama, I could easily see some of the troops deciding to abandon his cause. But that's just a guess. I also imagine that Tyrion and Brienne of Tarth will come to Jaime's defense. You should be able to cut the tension with a knife, but since Jon and Daenerys already agreed to call a truce while they fight the Night King, people will just have to get over the fact that the Kingslayer was given permission to fight alongside of them. Now I also think that in this episode, Daenerys might reveal to Jon that she is pregnant with his child. This is something that Daenerys best say to Jon in private before they go revealing that information to everyone at this point in time, when tensions are already so high. Maybe there can even be a scene where they speak in one of the bedrooms of the castle, or down in the crypts of Winterfell. Daenerys could say something along the lines of, "I haven't been feeling too well, so I went to see your maester to see if there was anything he could give me, but upon further inspection, he says that I am indeed pregnant." This could be a very emotional scene for Daenerys because she has assumed that she could never get pregnant again. She has always said the dragons will be the only children she'll ever have. Now we also know what Jon has always said.
But I couldn't do it. Because all I could think was, what if I got her pregnant? And she had a child. Another bastard named Snow. It's not a good life for a child.
He has said he will never father a bastard, which could lead to Jon and Daenerys getting married sometime next season. But this is something that doesn't have to happen right away because they do have more pressing issues at the moment. I also think that we need to get a pretty big scene with Bran Stark during this episode as well. Like I said, the Night King will be arriving in Winterfell by the 3rd episode. Therefore, Bran, Sam, Tyrion, or whoever needs to start finding some answers inside of the Weirwood Net, or those books from the Citadel, ASAP. This would be a good episode to start doing this, considering that the Night King will be here in the following episode. Not to mention, this would also give enough time for all these characters to start intermingling with one another. By now, Sam could have started to look through all the books he took from the Citadel, and if he had help with someone like Tyrion, he could make sense of all that information a hell of a lot faster. If Bran doesn't figure out when and where to look on his own, then he's gonna need someone to feed him that information. Bran might have to go all the way back in time to when the White Walkers came for the first time, which is a story he's heard from Old Nan ever since he was a little boy. Obviously, the White Walkers did not completely take over Westeros during the first long night, otherwise none of these characters would have even been born. So, he might need to go back and see what happened during the long night, and see how it ended. What really caused the White Walkers to flee back into the north? Can they recreate whatever was done back then? If there truly was a legendary figure like the Last Hero or Azor Ahai, can that prophecy be fulfilled once again? Which character from our current story can take this legendary figure's place? These are just some of the things that Bran can possibly find inside of the Weirwood Net. Now I am assuming that Bran will see more than just this, but these are some of the things that we have heard about since the beginning of the story, so I imagine they would come into play to some extent by the end of the story. Now what I think would be really cool is as soon as Bran comes out of his vision of learning more about the Night King, and hopefully how to stop his advance, this could transition right into our final scene of the episode. As I've said before, we should see the Night King attack a few castles before he reaches Winterfell. This could keep the Night King moving at a reasonable pace, to allow all of our other characters to get to Winterfell before he arrives. It would also allow Bran a little more time to figure out how to stop him before it's too late. Also, if us as an audience get to see the Night King completely obliterating town after town, this will intensify the fear of knowing what could happen when he reaches Winterfell, where most of our beloved characters are located. This would also raise the stakes in Westeros because what was always a threat just lurking on the other side of the wall has now become a reality as they continually find out the Night King is smashing town after town as he works his way down to the central location in the north, which is of course Winterfell. We need to see him getting much closer by the end of this episode. Perhaps we could even get a scene in Winterfell where one of the characters makes a comment about how the temperature keeps getting lower and lower with each passing night. I think that would be a really interesting way of indicating how the Night King is getting closer and closer to Winterfell. But let me know what you think about this episode. Don't forget to leave some questions or comments down below. Make sure you tune in for the next episode because that will be the 3rd episode where shit is really gonna pop off. I want to thank everyone for watching today's video. I really appreciate that, as always, and I also want to thank everyone on Patreon for supporting the channel. I hope you all have a great day. I will see you in the next one. Bye.